Hi guys, welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School. Welcome to a new school year. I just started my 8th year of teaching and I think my 5th year of documenting it here on YouTube. So on one hand, there are some things that I feel like I've kind of figured out about teaching, but every single year that I go back, I realize I also need to focus on this. So for a lot of us, when we go back to school and we have those teacher staff meetings before the kids come, one of the things that we look at is the data from the previous year. I teach in California where we use the Common Core State Standards, and then the test that we give in the spring is called the SBAC. I think in different states it's called something slightly different, but a lot of us are looking at that data when we come back after summer. The kids took their tests in the spring, now we have the results and we can look at it and see what we need to do in the upcoming year. And I've always been kind of intimidated and overwhelmed by all of those numbers and all of those classifications, and I'm like, okay, how can I take this and actually apply it to my teaching and turn it into something meaningful? So last year at that back to school meeting, all of the teachers are looking at our students' scores from the previous year, and my principal really wanted us to look at those numbers and look at where our students were and spend the year really designing our curriculum and designing our lessons to make sure that we were supporting our students where they needed to be supported. And to be honest, our kids tend to test pretty well. We usually have very decent test scores, but we always have this one discrepancy where for the most part our kids can read and they can write and their comprehension is fine, but those listening skills are always our lowest category. And at first we're kind of joking about it, well, yeah, I could have told you these kids don't listen. So we started meeting in our grade level teams about it and kind of just thinking about why maybe our students wouldn't be scoring all that well on the listening section. And we're like, well, we never really teach that. We just kind of assume they know how to listen. And I asked my students about it. I'm like, what is the hard part? You hear the passages and then you have these questions, what makes it hard? And they told me yeah, they can understand what they are listening to, but then they just weren't really prepared for the questions, and they just hadn't really done anything in that format before. And we started to realize we just weren't teaching them this. The reason that they weren't performing as well is because we just weren't giving them opportunities to practice that skill. We just assumed that they were picking that up somewhere, but it is something that you need to explicitly teach to your students. And there are strategies and best practices and certain kind of structures that students can follow when they're doing a listening activity that will help them to be successful. So my principal had us try out Listenwise last year, and we implemented this across all of our departments, and not just in their English classes, because we know that literacy is embedded and important in all of the content areas. And we knew that this was something that all of our teachers could really help out with. So some of this might sound familiar to you. This might be something that is also happening in your school. We've seen that where listening is tested as an ELA skill, the scores tend to be a little bit lower because our kids aren't practicing this skill explicitly. So I had been talking with Listenwise after I started using their program with my students, and they are very kindly sponsoring this video so that I can share a little bit more about their program with you and how you can use it in your classroom. And it doesn't just have to be in your English classes. It's great for English classes, but they also have a lot of science and social science content. So if your school is telling you, we need literacy in all content areas, and you're getting a little bit stressed out because you're not an English teacher and you still need to cover all of your science content or all of your history content, this is a program that really can help you cover more content and do it in a little bit different way, and then support them in those skills that they need for their tests at the end of the year. We started to recognize too that when students are better listeners, they're just better learners. They just have another avenue of intaking information, and we have more ways to reach them with content. I really like listening to podcasts when I'm driving or doing the dishes or whatever. You probably do too. It's a common way now to get information about current events or to listen to books on tape. We have all of these auditory resources now, on our phones. So if we can teach our students to be really good at processing information through listening, then we just open up so many more opportunities for them in their future where they're able to learn about whatever they want to learn about in a whole nother way. So today we're going to look at a lesson that I'm planning to use with my 6th grade history students. I do teach English and history, which is kind of nice because I get the perspective of the history teachers who are like, we have so much content to teach, like you can't ask us to do anything else, we have so much to cover. And then the English teachers that are like, this is all on our backs, we've got to teach like the informational text and the literature and the writing and the listening and everything. Some of the other departments need to help out. So I hear both of those things and I'm able to kind of like be a bridge between the different departments, because really when we're doing literacy well, it does like merge very well and actually end up saving you time and increasing your productivity. So just a couple quick things about Listenwise. It is best for like 5th grade up through high school. So for my middle school students, this was great. It's probably gonna be a little bit too much for students in like lower elementary, but definitely middle and high school is like the sweet spot. We do have English language learners at my school, and we're gonna talk about that because this does add an extra layer of difficulty for them, but there's a lot of scaffolding to help them access all of this information. So we will talk about that in just a minute. There are 2 account options. So there is a free account. You can listen to all of the stories on Listenwise. You can see all of the comprehension questions and discussion questions. And then with the paid premium account, you do get a lot more. So you get access to all of those scaffolding materials. There are lesson plans, listening supports, quizzes that students can take on their own student accounts. You can customize the assignments, slow down the audio, provide transcripts and all of that. So if you feel like your students are going to need some of those supports, then the premium account is probably what you'll need. Okay, getting out my laptop here, I'm going to show you one of the lessons that I was looking at yesterday. Oh, let me find it. Okay, because here is kind of another difficult thing. The textbooks that we have are good, they're fine, but sometimes there are like topics that I want to go a little bit more deeply into, and there's, you know, nothing else in my textbook on it for kids, and then sometimes the information that I look up on that topic is just way above like a 6th grade reading level and really like a 6th grade like comprehension level. It's just like nerdy adult material, you know. So I was going through some of the stuff on Listenwise, and I like that the stories are about 3 to 6 minutes long. So it's not a ton of text. Nothing is super long. And here's a tip for any time you ask kids to listen to something, tell them how long it is ahead of time. They just need to like mentally prepare for how long they're in for this. And then, you know, if they start to get a little wiggly around like 3 minutes and it's a 4-minute story, you can tell them like, okay, one more minute. And another good thing about these being fairly short stories is that you're probably going to want to play them a couple of times, so you will have time in class to go through it more than once. So one thing that I wish our textbook went into a little bit more deeply is King Cyrus of Persia and the Cyrus cylinder. As you know, I really like to teach the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I like to look at pretty much everything through a lens of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and this is one of the founding documents in like all of human civilization, ensuring rights to people. So I think this is like a really important thing to, you know, spend a little bit more time on than our textbook tends to do. So in their social studies section, I found this. This article is Persian Empire Treasure, the Cyrus Cylinder. And on a scale of 1 to 3, this is a level 1 for the language challenge. It's 4 minutes long. A lot of their materials are from like NPR or really like well-respected podcasts. So you're getting good stuff here, because it is tough to just be like, let's do more listening and then just try to find grade level appropriate podcasts. Okay, so if we look at this, this is something that like I typically listen to on NPR. We have an NPR host, a reporter, and then the chair of Middle Eastern Studies who is being interviewed. We've got the transcript. There are some assignment resources, and I really like the comprehension questions that they've come up with. And this saves me a lot of time because I'm capable of finding some good podcasts and articles and stuff to share with my students, but then like sometimes writing out the comprehension questions, just, it can be time consuming. So some of the comprehension questions are, What is the Cyrus cylinder? What groups of people consider it an important artifact? What historical detail does the Cyrus cylinder contain? I love this question. What evidence is presented for how the Cyrus cylinder could be seen as a human rights document? And then we've got some discussion themes. How do you think our understanding of Cyrus the Great might have been different had the Cyrus cylinder not been found? So this is going to spark some great conversation, and this is exactly like how I love to run my class. I love discussing questions like this. There are also vocabulary words down here, like the Persian Empire, for example, the Smithsonian Institute, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Not everybody's going to know all of these things. And those are like the tier 1 vocabulary words. There are some more that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of. So like the tier 2 vocabulary words are like document, approach, established. Like in this context, they might even mean something like a little bit different than what students would understand. And then even these tier 3 vocabulary words like dates back to, that's an idiom that I wouldn't have thought to explain or like brush up. Come to be, talk down to. Those are other idioms I might not have thought of. So this is really helpful if you're working with students that are either still learning English or maybe students who have auditory processing issues. And a lot of our students do. They also provide listening organizers, and I think this is probably the best thing that we can do for students when they're working on their listening skills, and something that if we have them practice all year long, then when they go to take those listening tests at the end of the year, they can kind of take their own notes and they know how to organize information without necessarily looking at the text. So they give you some of those graphic organizers to have students practice. There's a teacher's guide, which is great if you need some help just teaching the entire lesson. It has like an intro for you, the supports that you'll need, the reflection at the end. And if you're writing your lesson plans and you need to include standards, it gives you all the standards. So the social studies standards for one thing, and the language arts standards. Reading informational text, speaking and listening, the language standards. So it's definitely got you covered. If you ever need to write like a sample lesson and you want it to be really, really thorough and just include everything, maybe replicate one of these lessons for yourself. There's a scaffolding section, so if you want to do more simplified listening comprehension questions, they've got those. They've got the vocabulary again. And then there are quizzes. And if you have the premium account, students can take these quizzes on their own account. And it gives you the correct answers as the teacher, but you can also preview it as a student, like if you want to go through the questions together. And all of that is just in one lesson. So you could spend quite a bit of time teaching this in class. If you had the premium account, this could be like a homework assignment later in the year once students kind of have like the format down. So I really like that this can be like an in-class teaching tool or an extension activity or something that you use as sort of like a flipped classroom activity where they do this ahead of time before coming to class, and then you have your discussion in class with everybody. I'm thinking I would kind of like them to listen to it at home, because then if there are students who want to listen to it a couple of times, they can do that. And if other students don't need to, they can just listen to it once, but then we can come to class the next day with all of us understanding the material. I really like that they also have a current events section. For my history classes, this is something that's really important to me. I always want them to be aware of what's going on in the world, and we dedicate time each week to current events. So this, I think, is something that I'm going to add into our current events time. And again, it's something that they could listen to at home and then come to class ready to discuss. Some of the science stories I feel like are really useful to me as an English teacher, because if there's something that we're looking at in a story in our English textbook and we need like a little bit more understanding of that concept, then I can have students learn a little bit more about it through Listenwise. And the final thing to let you know is just that my students really liked it. So last year with my 6th grade history students, for every unit, I tried to do one listening activity. So, you know, for ancient Mesopotamia, we would do one somewhere in there. For ancient China, one somewhere in there. And then we were on one unit, I can't remember what it was, but we hadn't done any podcasts or listening activities with it yet. And a student was like, when are we doing a podcast? And I was like, oh, you're right. I forgot to set one up for this one. But they came to expect it and they really enjoyed it. They liked using a little graphic organizer and kind of like processing their thoughts down on paper as they listened. And I do feel like a lot of the content here that I've seen anyway is a little bit higher level, you know, because it's like on NPR, like it's kind of intended for adults. But since it's chunked down into such a small piece. It's only a few minutes at a time, and there are all these like levels of scaffolding that you can give your students. They're able to access these ideas and these conversations that seem like very mature. And I think students felt a little bit, you know, like proud of that. Like, yeah, we're listening to this stuff that like adults listen to, and it doesn't sound childish. It doesn't sound like what's in their textbook. It sounds like they're doing this real world learning, which they are. So they really like that aspect of it. And then one other thing that I noticed as I was listening to this Cyrus Cylinder story, say that 5 times fast, is that we could have read this, we could have like read the transcript, you know, but it was actually really cool to hear the different accents. So the professor that they're interviewing has kind of like a Middle Eastern accent, and I thought that was really great to hear the way that he speaks like in an authentic way. Like sometimes we have like characters in books or characters in movies that have certain accents, and sometimes those things like solidify stereotypes, and they're actually not increasing our students' understanding of people different from them. And so I like that this guy is not an actor. This is just the way that he authentically speaks. And then on the flip side, some of my students sound this way, or their parents sound this way, and to hear a very intelligent, very educated man speaking this way with authority about a topic that he knows about, I also think is important. I've been listening to the Trevor Noah book, Born a Crime, on Audible actually, and there's a section where he talks about language and how language divides us and unites us, and he gives the example of, you know, this scientist in Mexico who's doing these amazing things. He's really smart, and then he comes to the United States, and if he speaks with a thick Spanish accent, people suddenly don't think he's as smart because we attach certain ideas to different accents. So I don't know how many of the stories within the Listenwise curriculum has people speaking with accents, but I just think that even that in itself can be something powerful. So I'm excited to share this story with my students when we get to the Persia section of our year. And again, I'm going to be using it for, you know, to do at least a podcast per unit with my history students, and then with my English classes I'll be pulling in more current events this way, and then just any like supplemental research type articles that can help us understand the context of some of the stories that we read. So in the description bar down below I'll have all of the information that you need in order to start a free trial or do a premium trial. It's something that you can talk about with your school as a whole, or you could just try it for yourself. So again, my principal recognized from our data that this was something that she wanted our entire school to do. So we did like a school-wide premium trial so that all of the teachers in all of the content areas could test this out and support kids. And so that kids would get used to doing this, like no matter what class they're in. Like sometimes they get used to only doing certain things in like English class, for example. And then they're like, hey, I don't want to use these skills in this class. I want to keep them all separate. But we're trying to integrate all of those skills across content areas. So it's definitely something that I would recommend like bringing up to your administration if you can, and trying to find out if they've got it in the budget to have everybody do it, just because it is more effective that way. But if that's not an option for you, you can definitely do it in your own classroom, and you're going to be meeting those standards that you're always trying to meet with all of your lessons, and preparing them for those tests at the end of the year, as well as preparing them to just learn in this way, even once they're done with school, and use audiobooks and podcasts and stuff like that as a way to just learn more about whatever they're interested in. So thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to Listenwise again for being a perfect partner on this video, because this was something that I wanted to share anyway. Let us know in the comments down below if you have used Listenwise and what kind of things you've done with it, because we know even though like this curriculum and content is amazing, every teacher takes it and kind of makes it their own and does their own thing with it. That's our magic. That's what we do. So thanks again, guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.